Okay, let's give it 1 minute. Okay, I can see people logging in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to wait a minute or so that everybody can log in. We have a big crowd today. So in the meantime, if you feel like it, you could write in the chat where you are joining us from, what are your working languages, and whether you've already tried ChatGPT in some form or another. So go ahead. And in a little while, Gabriel will probably need a volunteer. So let's see. Okay, we have James from Ottawa, Mark from Boston. Feel free to add your working languages. Amit from Bram, India, Paola from Argentina, James from Ottawa has English and Spanish. Maciej from Warsaw, Polish, German, English. You can take your pick, Gabriel. Okay, people from Brazil, Germany. Okay, all right. While the others are joining in, let's go ahead. So welcome everyone to today's GALA webinar. My name is Isabella Massardo. I'm a content strategist here at GALA. And today's webinar is sponsored by BWX, and it's presented by Gabriel Ferman, who is the founder and CEO of the company. Gabriel is a thought leader, an expert in business automation and localization technology. He has a passion for cooking, playing tennis, playing acoustic guitar, nature, and he also writes a very good newsletter called Merging Minds, which you can find on Substack. And actually, I just received the latest issue on, I think it's cost and ethics and large language models. I haven't had time yet to go through it. Sorry, Gabriel. But taking a look at his background, the thing that strikes me most is that he spent 6 months meditating and raking leaves at a Buddhist monastery in southern Taiwan. And that was pretty brave. So as always, feel free to use the QA box to submit any questions that you might have. And I would invite you to do it throughout the presentation as you think of them. The webinar will be recorded, and I'll send a follow-up email with a link to the recording as soon as it is available on our website. So Gabriel, I'm going to go backstage and leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you very much for those kind words. It's very, very nice to be here with everybody today. It's an honor, a privilege, and hopefully we can make this fun, and I can also answer lots of questions as we move along the way. I'm not going to be talking about a lot of stuff, but what I will be talking about, I will go into a certain amount of depth. And I welcome and encourage any questions along the way. Isabella, please stop, interrupt me whenever you'd like. I won't be looking at the chat, but if you want to flag any questions to me, good questions, bad questions, there are no such things. Anything is a good question for me. I'll get on with it. So today we're going to be focusing on the continuous learning engine that could, and I'm going to explain exactly what I am referring to that. Skip a few slides. What I'm going to be showing really is, let me zoom out. I think I want to show directly in our tool. Close this, perfect. And here is BWX. It's our translation management system. This is the project settings screen. I'm going to go straight in to our translation editor. And my first example is going to be in Portuguese, my mother tongue. But I'll try to back translate as much as I can so that even if you don't speak any Portuguese, it can make sense of it. But I will show this also in other languages as well, even though I can barely scratch those other languages. But the whole goal for me today is really to make sure that everybody can understand the mechanics, the concepts that we're working with and what we're trying to do. All right, so first I'm going to talk about where I see that the current problems are that we face as far as knowledge management in localization and translation, right? And this suggestion tab here on the right, I think kind of illustrates that typically, at least for me, in most translation editing environments, I know that's the case in BWX. The old paradigm, you're basically working with a translation memory feed that says one thing and is typically, let's say, the golden feed. That's the feed to be really focused and regarded. Then you have possibly, if you have machine translation turned on, you're gonna see another suggestion from another engine, typically when there is no translation memory feed available for that. And then you typically have a glossary as well, which may or not be in agreement with whatever is in the TM and whatever is in the glossary, right? And I think I can illustrate that pretty clearly over here. As far as what we consider the old paradigm, you basically have one knowledge base that's machine translation. It could be a trained server, non-trained engine, but you definitely have one machine translation. You have another knowledge base that's the glossary. And you have a third component that's the translation memory. And they all typically, the translator will have to make sense of these different sources of information in order to come up with a translation that is not just well structured, but that follows, let's say, the trends available in those linguistic corpuses, right? And I'm going to pause 1 second, see if anybody has any questions so far as what we call the old paradigm.
No questions for now.
Okay, so going back here to our translation editor, let me see if I can find an example that shows exactly what I mean. So this is, number 3 is a good one, right? Number 3, you can see here that I have 3 different feeds coming from the translation memory. I have 101% that says entrar no sistema, which literally would back translate it to enter the system for login. You have another entry saying that's 100%, so it's less privileged than the 101, saying logar no sistema. A 99% match that also says logar. The machine translation doesn't even suggest not translating login as just maintaining it as login. And the glossary has login as logar, right? So typically, as the translator, I would have to look at these different informations and I would have to make sense of them and decide what I would like to do. So maybe in this case, I'm going to just apply the 101% entry. But then I'm left with a problem, which is the 101 entry doesn't agree with the glossary. Now, if I ask AI to translate it, and this is the continuous learning engine, and I apply it, I can see here that it has taken into account what is in the machine translation, what is in the translation memory, what is in the glossary, each with different weights. And this weighting system that we've devised is dynamic to make what it considers to be the best possible decision or suggestion for me as a translator. So in this case, it merged the glossary with a 101 feed and produced basically what was already in the 101% feed. Now, I want to flag one very important component here that's super important to stress about everything that goes through large language models, which is the probabilistic character of suggestions, right? Unlike, let's say, a standard one-to-one system, let's say, where you input X and you get Y as the output every single time, and if not every single time, 99.99999 and go on into infinity, right? Maybe if 100% is not a real concept, you get, for the vast majority of the times, approximating infinity, you get the same result, right? If 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. When you're talking about large language models, you're talking about probabilistic decision making. So in this sense, it's inferring that probably, given this linguistic corpus that it's working with, this is the best feed. Now we have another mechanism that we call translation smells, that is flagging this as a problem. And it's saying that it's the incorrect verb formality, and it says the translation uses an informal verb form logad instead of a formal one intad, right? And translation smells is a semantic verifier that we've devised to help also flag for potential inaccuracies, errors in translations and things like that. It's also AI based. But what's very interesting is right in this very first example, we're seeing that the AI won't agree with itself. And that's something it's a recurring pattern, and it's by design. It's not an accident that the AI isn't going to always agree with itself, because it's going to look at text from a probabilistic scenario and from a contextual scenario. And in this case, for instance, by design, we have translation smells looking at information with a different set of context than the generative language engine, because we want a different set of eyes looking at that. So again, I'm going to pause here 1 second, see if anybody has any questions regarding this particular example.
Not for now. No, I don't see any questions for now.
So let's change this. Let's change the glossary here as an example. And let's say that we want to call this, instead of, let's keep this in English. See what happens. I have no idea what's going to happen here. So now I've instructed the glossary that login should be kept in English. Now let's ask AI to retranslate this. And now it's just suggesting login as the translation. Let's change it again. Let's change it to, now this time, let me look for a good synonym. I'm gonna choose a weird term. It's super formal, ingressar. But it's correct technically, I think, but it's a weird way of expressing it. Let's see what it does with that. And it's adjusting the feed dynamically, right? And what's really cool about this is that typically, again, I like to stress the problem, otherwise this doesn't really seem like a solution, right? One of the big pain points for me when I translate is that I don't know exactly what to trust and how much. And for me, there's a huge problem around translation memories and glossaries, particularly because as translation memories get older, they typically stop agreeing with the latest terminology that's available to a translator. As terminology changes, it stops agreeing with translation memories. And then you're faced with this big problem, which is either you start labeling these translation memories as legacy and you start penalizing them, which means they're not as good anymore, or you don't know if you can trust them. Then you have translators saying, well, I can't trust the translation memory. It's not good. It's misguiding me. And so I feel pulled in very different directions, right? So the potential that we're seeing with working with an engine like this is that we're making better inferences based on the knowledge available, so that, yeah, maybe I won't agree with any of this as a translator. I can go ahead and just just change this to include, for instance, because I don't like the way it sounds. And right now it's flagging another kind of inconsistency, which I can agree with or not agree with. But the point is, I have the final say as a translator. I can decide whether I want to go with it or not, whether I want to update the knowledge base or not. But I'm getting a more well-informed, more well-structured suggestion. Again, I think I want to pause again and see if anybody has any questions regarding this. And I'm getting a warning here that the glossary isn't green, but I'm going to override it.
Okay, well, there are a couple of questions. First of all, from Marina, she asks, what would the AI do with a similar word but wrong for that context?
That's a great question. It's going to change. The ingressar was the exact example, right? It's a similar word. I don't consider it right for that context. I've never seen a website in Brazilian Portuguese saying ingressar as the idea of entering. But it did its best to apply that, right, in the previous example that I was giving. But one thing that's really interesting is that if I put things that are flat out wrong or don't agree with other things that are being informed through machine learning to the AI, it may flat out not suggest it at certain points. So when you get into, let's say, the awkward factor, it makes decisions based on probabilities. Sometimes it will ignore that suggestion. Sometimes it will try to squeeze it in. Like in the ingresar scenario, try to squeeze it in. But sometimes if I just say something that's very, very off the wall, it may override whatever I taught it.
There's another question from Anna. Is the smells system using the same generative AI model as the main AI engine, or is it a completely different system?
Right now, it's the same model. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But taught with different contexts. So the information available to smells and the prompts that are triggering smells are very different than the information and context that are triggering the generative AI mechanism. But same, everything that you see as far as AI is being powered through GPT.
Okay.
Either 3.5 or 4, depending on the operation. Clear.
Okay, no more questions for now. So.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's pick one more example. So this is a bigger sentence. Starts illustrating again kind of the challenges. In this case, I have 2 different feeds coming from the translation memory, a third machine translation feed. They're all a little bit different from each other. And then I have a few different glossary terms, which is, again, in my opinion, very similar to what happens in day-to-day translations, right? You have quite a few glossary terms that are flagged, and it's hard for me, when I have to read through all of these segments, especially if I'm being squeezed for time and for productivity. If I have to read through all of these suggestions, and if I have to see exactly what the TM differences are and what's changing where, translating becomes challenging for me from a knowledge management perspective, right? And in this case, for instance, if we apply, just to illustrate this, right, we're tokenizing the glossary terms in yellow, right? If I apply, for instance, the machine translation, I have 3 terms that have been tokenized, which means that, and I have a lot more that have been flagged in the source. Clearly, the machine translation is randomly coinciding with the glossary at certain points, but not in every point. If I take a look and apply, let's say, the 93% feed, I still have 3 terms that are being tokenized. And if I apply the 101 feed, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms that are being tokenized. Now, let's say that I want to make sense of this translation. And right now it's using the word gestão for management. But let's say I want to change this in the glossary and I want to call it management instead of literally translates as gestão, which is correct. I want to translate it as administração, which would back translate as administration, which is pretty synonymous, I would say, to management. And now let's ask AI to translate this segment and see what happens. And so in theory, what's going on here in the background is we're teaching it the machine translation, we're teaching it all these different feeds that are coming from the translation memory, not just the feeds that you're seeing, we're also teaching with lower thresholds as well, because it's good context often. We're teaching the glossary, and then we're asking GPT to make sense of this. And here you can see that it did change management to administração, and it also rephrased the sentence, and it's also flagging a potential problem in accuracy. It's saying the translation is accurate, but it can be improved by using a more appropriate term for a translation management system. Administração de traduções is not a commonly used term in Portuguese, and the sistema de gerenciamento de traduções or sistema de gestão de traduções would be more appropriate. Again, I can agree or disagree as a translator with that, but at least I'm getting a suggestion that is taking into account what I've just taught it in runtime again. And typically, part of the challenge is, like, let's say I were to just add a term to the glossary in my translation, maybe I would add it, but maybe the translation memory won't reflect that. Maybe whatever I'm getting from the machine translation won't reflect that. So I'm constantly having to juggle between these different sources of information. In this way, I'm getting, again, I'm not getting necessarily a perfect feed, but I'm getting a more well thought feed, at least in my experience, and at least based on what I've seen. I've heard from people who have been using it, which quite a few thousand users around the world so far. So again, I'm gonna pause and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. Yes, there are a couple of questions. So first of all, Jody was asking, did I understand correctly that AI can override what the live translator enters? If so, as a translator, why would I want that? And can I turn that off?
Mm-hmm. No, AI cannot override, at least not the way we've designed it. It's never override. The human in the loop always has the final say, at least currently in this design. I mean, I'm sure that maybe some of our clients at some point may want your AI to override. I don't see why, but it's configurable for sure. It's a setting, it's a system setting. But as far as my perspective goes, the human should have always the final say. And again, just to show as an example here, like AI is flagging a potential problem in translation accuracy. I may not agree with it. If I confirm the segment, it's going to store and confirm exactly what I taught it and not what it thinks. And not only that, but what's very interesting is the learning process, right? Whenever I confirm a segment, I'm updating the translation memory, which means that in the next segment I translate, it's going to take that into account as far as thinking about the best possible suggestion for me. So you're not talking anymore about, let's say, a static translation memory that is what it is. And let's say maybe you translate something in a more informal tone than what's in the translation memory for that particular document. That's going to be stored in like this far away database that's basically static and just pulling feeds that are within a certain Levenstein edit distance, right? So that's the nature of the translation memory. And the machine translation, even if you've trained it, again, you've trained it, but with knowledge from the past and glossary from the past, it's not reacting in runtime to what I'm doing and to how I'm translating. So that's the key difference as far as the method of operation goes. Okay.
Let's take another question from Yuka. She asks, is this based on GPT-4? Sorry, is this based on GPT-4?
Right now, the engine is being run through GPT 3.5. And the reason for this is GPT-4 costs 30 times more, at least. It depends on the context that's used, but on average, GPT-4 operations cost 30 times more for us than GPT 3.5. And for this kind of operation, you get in over 98% of the cases, similar results between 3.5 and 4. So in our opinion, for this kind of scenario, it's not, at least with current token pricing, it doesn't make sense to use 4. Well, it's possible, but it's slower and results aren't dramatically better. If we were working with things that actually required, let's say, more cognitive discernment or apparent cognitive discernment, then we would defer to 4. And there are a few operations that we have that use 4, but we try to limit to those operations to things that are very, that will benefit specifically from a more powerful model.
Let's see, Amit is asking how many data sets, records, and time does it need to train this machine engine for a certain quality output of a specific domain, and how the quality benchmarks are being maintained within, so with machine or human intervention?
Great question. So 0, you don't need anything. You can start from scratch with, and this is a good example, like right here, for instance, in Italian, I don't have a translation memory here. I'm just getting machine translation feeds, which is something you can turn on or off. But I'm just getting machine translation. I don't have anything in the glossary, and I can teach it. So let's say here, for instance, Isabella, if you can help me with Italian, is there a synonym that you'd like to see for manage?
No, not really, but I would like to have another translation for a modo tuo.
For which one?
Possible.
Modo
Your
tuo.
way.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, modo tuo. Let's do that. Oh,
Your way. Yeah, I would like another.
perfect. So, what would you like to say?
Probably come preferisci.
Come preferisci. Is this correct or no? Did I spell it
Preferisci
correctly?
with an I at
Perfect.
the end.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, not
Okay,
that
let's go.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
I think I have something loaded here with the Italian glossary. Maybe I don't have the Oh, I know what's going on here. I don't have the glossary with
That's
Italian.
okay.
Let me see here. Oop. Oh, there it is. I didn't try this one out before. Let me reopen the Italian. Okay. Oh, I think I know what happened here. And this is actually what's interesting here. I'm showing the reviewed model as well. So it's categorizing changes that I'm doing compared to the translation that was available in the previous workflow, also through AI. But that's not the focus here. The correct one. Italian again. See here. Come preferisci. Modo tuo. Yeah, there seems to be something that I misconfigured in the Italian here. Come
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm doing something wrong. Let me see in another project.
That's
here.
okay. We can try with another.
Yeah. I love the fact that there's always unpredictable things in there. Yeah, something I did something wrong with the Italian glossary that I didn't do with.
We can try with something else. We can try with something else later on.
But let me show you here the same example here in Portuguese, right? So okay, so you were saying your way, right? And right now your way in Portuguese is modo, right? And you were just making the analogy with Italian. Let's say, let me delete this from the glossary and let's add your way as however you prefer. So I'm saying Portuguese como preferir, which is very similar to Italian as how you prefer. Let's try this as verb. It saved the term. So I just taught it that term. Let's ask AI to translate that. And it did exactly what we just taught it. It's, if I apply the translation, it's basically saying gerencie traduções como preferir, which is exactly what we just taught it. It's not applying the translation because this is already a reviewed segment in the further workflow mode, so it's not allowing me to apply it, but it is, you can see here in this little box here that it was able to learn from what we just taught it in the glossary.
That's excellent. Of course, there are more questions.
Let's go.
So Nestor is asking, is there any limit in terms of volume, word count for processing with this tool combination? So 10,000, 100,000, 1 million words at once. It says, in the company I work for, we're processing 600,000 plus words in single releases.
No, there's no limit. One thing that is a limit for us as far as things that we've researched and worked on that I think is important to stress is there are very significant rate limits as far as the APIs available to work with GPT, both through OpenAI and through Microsoft Azure. So for instance, one thing we can't do that we'd like to do yet is be able to pre-translate large batches of content using this technique. But as far as
Mhm.
actually translating, loading it into BureauWorks and going through each segment and learning, there's really no limits. We're able to process millions and millions and millions of words a day.
Excellent. And then someone is asking, going back to the example that you showed with the word management, someone asks, I see that AI did not replace all instances of the term management in that segment with the updated term. Is that done on purpose or is it an AI glitch?
No, yeah, that's the probabilistic thing that's is in my opinion one of the hard things to understand as far as AI goes, because exactly, for instance, here, right, you have the word management here that was directly translated as administração, and then you have a second occurrence of management here that was kept as gestão, right? And the reason why AI did this, I can't look into the black box and open the hood and see what AI was thinking, but there's a probability that basically the decision making behind this is that the when running all this learning through all the parameters, the decision was made that this word here, gestão, was a more probable positive outcome than administração, even though the glossary had it as administração. Now, again, it's in most cases that I've seen, and I've seen thousands of cases so far, it will do its best attempt to preserve the glossary in every single attempt, but it will override it occasionally. And again, that's the weird thing about AI, right? We're used to thinking, at least I'm used to thinking about software is either I get the expected outcome and it's always like that, or it's not like that and it's a glitch, right? But with AI, because it's probabilistic, the glitch, quote unquote, is by design. You're going to see situations where the system is going to disagree with what it's saying. And just to take it one step further, right? Again, it's checking for smells, and it's not agreeing at the smell level, it's not agreeing with its own translation. And if I activate what I call the translation critic, that's a second set of eyes looking at the translation and suggesting potentially something different, it's suggesting an entirely different translation. And it's saying, and in this case, it's working with a different context, and it's basically suggesting that it's not using either gestão or administração, it's calling it gerenciamento de tradução. And then the second occurrence of it, it's calling it gestão. And it's explaining the suggested translation more accurately conveys the meaning of the original sentence by using the term gerenciamento instead of administração to better reflect the idea of managing the translation localization process. So one of the things that at least I find fascinating, and I like to encourage as far as our system behavior, is the idea that you can get different vantage points from AI, right? Instead of trying to work with it, at least that's how I see it. Instead of seeing it as something that is a de facto suggestion or the best suggestion always, it's one suggestion. And it's definitely, in my opinion, it's a step above whatever's coming from the TM and the MT, because it is factoring in the glossary and runtime. So for me, clearly it's a step above. Not necessarily that it's going to be perfect, still going to have to fix things. And in this case, for instance, I can go ahead here and manually fix the term that wasn't done in accordance with the glossary. Now, it does, even the English, in my opinion, is questionable, right? Because it's using management and management twice in the same sentence, maybe too much management. But the fact is that now I've added administração, and it's tokenizing both, albeit maybe sounding a little bit weird or repetitive in Portuguese. So that's the thing about language, right? It's sometimes even the source is written in ways that maybe is SEO driven, but not necessarily the thing that sounds more natural. And that's why we're here, right? There's a ton of nuances and little contextual decisions that need to be made on a case-by-case basis. Our goal isn't to create an engine that is going to replace anybody. Our goal is to create an engine that allows for more productivity and more points of view without having to necessarily ask someone for an opinion. You have a different opinion in runtime, right? I can go into this segment, for instance, and do the same thing. Let's ask AI to review it. It's going to look at the segment, and it's going to suggest possibly something else. Sometimes it won't suggest any changes depending on exactly what's going on. And in this case, it is suggesting a different sentence.
Okay, excellent. Let's just go back for a second to that your way example, because Anna Maria has a question. Would it be possible to delete completely both the source and the target from the glossary and still get a translation in the target we are currently working on?
Sure. So let's delete all of the terms in the glossary. So now that we don't have any of these terms in the glossary, the expected behavior is that it's going to be very close to whatever is in the 100% match. Let's see what happens. And it's doing exactly that, right? The AI suggestion now is saying exactly, you can see here, it's mirroring the 100% match. Gerencie suas traduções do jeito que quiser, which is exactly what's in the 100% match. And now if I teach it differently, if I say, again, let's teach it differently your way, oops. Let's hear it again. So now I'm teaching it in a different way, your way, o seu jeito. Let's replace that. And now let's go back here. Now I have it in the glossary. Now let's ask AI to translate it again. And now it's applying what's in the glossary.
Yeah.
So gerencie suas traduções do seu jeito.
Okay.
So that's let's say the magic of it is the runtime aspect and the fact that it's dynamically trying to apply what's in the glossary, what's in the TM, what's in the MT, and that's all it's configurable. Like I can turn off MT if I'd like. But personally, one of the things that we've learned so far is that the more context, the better GPT translates. So for instance, asking GPT to translate a sentence, you get one result. If you say, well, Microsoft Translator translates it this way, Google translates it this way, Amazon translates this way, Beeple translates this way, what do you think? Then you get a much better translation than just asking it to translate, right? One thing that I keep always in mind is, as good as it is, it wasn't designed to be a translation engine. It was designed to be a probabilistic engine that is capable of predicting really well what the next likely word is for a given prompt, right? So again, I try to keep that in mind because it's helpful as far as understanding the mechanism behind everything.
Okay. Let's see. Another question. Let's stay on terminology. Is the AI capable of getting a list of terms that are to stay in native language and not get translated? Basically, is AI capable of managing a do not translate list?
Yeah. This is a perfect term. So over here, let's delete this from the glossary. I had a DNT. I had BWX previously in the glossary as a DNT. Now you can see one thing that's always interesting to me. Let me just refresh my screen here. Which one was the segment I was looking at? Okay. Okay, perfect. So this is a really cool example in my opinion, because okay, so you have 300 plus companies trust BWX, great. Now the machine translation really messed this up. It's saying 300 plus empresas trust bureau obras. So it's literally thinking that BWX is it's confusing the name of the company. It's thinking that trust bureau is the name of the company and that works is the verb in this machine translation output. I do have a 101% feed available, but let's say, for instance, I want to teach it that BWX is a term that it's identifying that it's a noun via AI as well. So the parts of speech are being identified as well. So let's save that. Now we know that BWX is a term that shouldn't be translated. If I ask AI to translate this, it's going to take into account also the TM. Let me see if I have an example that doesn't have the TM. But yeah, it's doing it correctly now. So mais de 300 empresas, confio no Bureau works. And if I teach it something differently, it's going to apply that as well. So yeah, but the question is, does it take into account DNT? Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the things that it does really well.
Okay. Let's see, before we get to the data protection questions, how does this integration behave with languages like right-to-left languages or rare languages? Does it has mechanism to put priority value to its native grammar rules and other critical factors?
We can share videos later, but I can show videos of this in Arabic, in Hebrew, Chinese, Russian, all kinds of different characters and different right to left orientations and things like that. So far, results are really good all over the board. Not perfect or anything, but really good as far as being able to learn, being able to dynamically apply these things. And the second part of the question, Isabella, was more focused on the configurability aspect. What was that again?
Let me see. What was it? Was the question? Does the system have a mechanism to put priority value to its native grammar rules and other critical factors?
So no, because that's the whole point of working with a model like GPT, right? If we're working with a dynamic system that's running through trillions of parameters, the idea is that the system is more capable than I would ever be capable of being able to map out things at a rule level. What we are doing is teaching it context. So it's, instead of teaching it the rule, I'm giving it the examples and allowing it to come up, not with rules, but with the most probable outcome given the examples that I'm teaching it. So in a way to try to answer this question, like, let's say, for instance, my translations are tending to the informal side. GPT is going to learn from what we're teaching it and probably start suggesting more informal translations to me based on what's the translation, based on what's in the TM. And again, remembering that we're not just teaching what you see here on the screen, we're teaching it lower thresholds as well because it contains relevant linguistic information. So that's the key difference, right? As far as configurability goes, we are able to configure and expose these some parameters at the UI level. For instance, how heavily will it weigh the glossary versus the TM, for instance, or how heavily will it weigh the TM versus the MT? What level of priority do you want to assign to these things? That's possible. But if you try to over-teach it, you start getting really bad results as well. So hopefully I answered that question, but it's not, let's say, endlessly configurable from a linguistic perspective, for sure.
Okay. So is there a way, Maria is asking a couple of questions, but the first one, and then we'll go to the others. Is there a way, is there a method to find the hallucinations from ChatGPT?
Well, I think so. I haven't seen any hallucinations here so far. The word hallucination is a little bit strong, I think. I think one thing is the probabilistic mechanism, right? I don't consider a probabilistic mechanism a hallucination. To me, a hallucination is basically when I'm using GPT through the UI and I start asking it, I start giving it prompts and it starts to completely deviate from whatever I'm prompting, that I would consider a hallucination. But in our engine, because there's very tight control around the machine learning processes that are going on in the back end, there's very little room for hallucinating. I mean, the worst that I've seen is, again, in a situation where I'll teach it something at the glossary level and it will override it with something else because it thinks it sounds repetitive or clumsy, awkward, etc.
Okay. Let's see, let's go to the protection and content security question. So, of course, how do you deal with content security in terms of personal identifiable information, GDPR, etc.?
Great question. So I have actually two different articles that go into depth about it. but the first thing is that this is an opt-in service, right? You can opt in as a BWX user, whether you want to share your data via API with OpenAI and Microsoft Azure hosting GPT models. As far as once you do, you are knowingly consenting to sharing your data, sharing your information with Microsoft Azure and OpenAI according to their own data usage and privacy policies. When you go into the let's say the risk factor as far as doing so, in a nutshell, and again, my article dissects that quite in depth. In a nutshell, your data is deleted after 30 days. It's not used to retrain any models, and very, very limited personnel within Microsoft or in OpenAI have access to that data, and only can typically have access to that if something very sensitive is flagged in that data. So it's on an exception basis. So you're basically running the risk of Microsoft Azure, which is as good as it gets as far as information security goes, up there with AWS and other leading information management companies, or the OpenAI API policy, which now is very similar to, at least from a wording perspective, is basically the same things that Microsoft Azure says, but then you're not going through a company that's as reputable from an information management and security perspective as Microsoft Azure. But those are basically the scenarios. It's the data is encrypted at rest, it's destroyed after 30 days, and it's not used for retraining purposes. At least that's what the two companies that we work with claim in their policies.
All right. So yeah, this is important, especially for those who work like Maria with confidential documents. So it's important to consider whether this would be an infringement of confidentiality, because there are names and other personal information. So
yeah, for sure.
let's see, Sebastian, if you need to send context to obtain a good quality output, how does that impact on the cost of each request, since OpenAI charges by character, and especially in comparison to traditional engines like Google, Microsoft, AWS, etc.?
Yeah, great question. So when we're sending information over through GPT's APIs, both OpenAI and Microsoft Azure, we're sending quite a bit of information. We're sending everything that you're seeing here as far as like these translation memory feeds on the right, the machine translation feed, or multiple feeds, whatever's in the glossary. So we're teaching it quite a bit. That's the context, in addition to the sentence that's actually being translated. As far as cost goes, OpenAI has their tokens and basically charges 0.00 for GPT 3.5, charges 0.002 cents, US cents per token, per 1,000 tokens. But we price it according per user. So essentially every user has a subscription amount tied to it that's depending on the tier that's being used, whether it's personal, business, or enterprise. And essentially it's user-based, it's recurring, it's a flat fee per user, and each user has the right to a certain amount of words processed per month, but it's not charged per word, or it's not by throughput, it's basically per user, at least in our model. If you work directly with GPT, then yes, the more information you send over, the more you're going to be billed.
Okay. Yuka is asking, is it possible to write the system to their own instance of GPT?
Yes, it's possible. If we have an independent API that we've created that communicates with different GPT models, and we can point them to the exact instance that's required if necessary.
Okay. And let's see, one more question from Ana Maria. Let's go back to the Portuguese example. Apology for the background noise on my side. Someone has a new Vespa probably is trying down the street in front of my house. I apologize. So let's go back to the example in Portuguese. And Ana Maria is asking that in that example, the formal form of verbs and pronoun was used. Would this tool be able to change all the formal form of verbs and pronouns into the informal automatically? If, for example, a customer changes the way they want to address their audience?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The teaching process won't be instant though, because it is taking, so for instance, we could expose a parameter that it shows, that allows the user to decide, let's say, tone, formal or informal. That's one context, right? But it's also taking into account the translation memory, the machine translation with different weights that are assigned dynamically. So as far as teaching goes, it's not necessarily a 0 or 1 scenario where it's formal or informal, but as I change things towards a more formal tone in practice, it's going to be suggest more formal things. And if I change things towards, so here's a good example, right? For instance, I translated the word work as in a really formal and awkward way, saying empenhe-se, which I did it on purpose to show that it tried to insert that glossary term, even though in my opinion it sounds kind of weird, but it did that, right? Now let's teach it in a more in a more informal way. Let's say, for instance, here instead of work, let's call it trabalho. You know, that's also want something more slangy than trabalho. Oh, let's call it Trump. That's super informal. Okay, so it literally says, like, you know, it's like Trump is very, very informal. I have no idea what it's going to do with that, but it's asking me to translate. May completely override and dismiss what I'm saying, but still curious to see what it's going to say. It did apply it. It said Trump com seus tradutores e agências, just super, super informal. But it is learning from that. And if I commit that to the translation memory, it's flagging a glossary mismatch. Let me override that. But now I have that as a 101%. So next time I go into a sentence that has any kind of bearing and similarity with this, it's going to refer back to what I just taught it, both at the glossary level and at the linguistic corpus level in the translation memory. So short answer is yes, it is, let's say, picking up on style.
It's picking up on style. It's not going to change everything automatically in the text, but it's learning from it, kind of. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
we're
more than
the
kind
question.
of learning. It's really learning. Just the learning is like learning is always a incremental process, right? It's not like I didn't know any Italian, now I speak Italian. It's like I learned to speak some Italian.
Okay, clear. We're through the questions now. If you wanted to go ahead, we have 7 more minutes. Maybe you want to show something else, or you want to show a video with, or do an experiment with other languages.
Yeah, let's see. I think I got worried about if I set up the glossaries correctly with other languages. Let me see what happens here in Spanish. Maybe I did
Let's see
something
whether
wrong.
I think we have people speaking Spanish. Yes, we have some people.
Okay, so here, perfect. Let's see. Okay, so Spanish, the glossary, I did configure it correctly. So now I said, I taught the engine that started should be empezar, which is wrong for the time of verb, and get started, empezar. Okay, it took into account the glossary as far as learning from what I was teaching it. Let's get another example here. See. Administre sus producciones a su manera. That's what it's suggesting. I can teach it again your way. Let's be really informal. De la manera que quieras. Oh, I did something wrong here with the glossary. Okay. Way. Yeah, I didn't test the other languages before, so I'm going to stick to Portuguese for now.
Okay.
But
That's
it's same principles.
okay. Let's see. I don't see any other questions for now. Let me check. No, I don't. But it's very interesting. It's, for me at least, it's one of the first implementations that I see of GPT in a TMS. I'm sure there are others, but it looks very promising. How much does the work of the translator change, do you think?
That's a really good question. I don't think it changes that much. I think the key thing is, at least for me, when I've been using this to translate, is there are a few different things that I feel as an experience that changes. One is I focus less on reading through the feeds, and I'm able to trust better whatever the AI is suggesting. So there's less grunt work as far as applying a glossary term, going through all the glossary terms, making sure that they were applied. There's more work that was automatically done for me there. The translation smells also, the fact that it's picking up on problems like over here makes me a little bit more reassured. Not that it's, again, no smells is no certainty that the translation is perfect, but smelling bad is a pretty good indication that something needs to be further flagged. So there is that. So I feel a little bit more reassured, and being able to ask the AI for different perspectives as well. I particularly like that, because sometimes I feel in doubt of whether I'm translating something in the best possible way or not, and being able to see that from a different set of eyes is always kind of like, okay, I don't agree with that, but thank you for the suggestion anyway. So yeah, and this is a good example, right? The AI suggested escolhe instead of decide, but I still want to keep decide in this case. Okay.
One more question I see coming in very quickly. Could you please explain the AI-powered quality professor in the review workflow?
Oh, sure. Let's do that. I'll do that in very few seconds. So let me open this same file I was working on, but now as an in-country reviewer. And let's start making changes here. So again, let's change gerencie to administre. And essentially what it's doing is it's categorizing this as a fluency change, and it's saying that the review translation improves the style and tone, making it sound more natural and idiomatic in Portuguese. Not necessarily that I agree with this, but this is a suggestion of categorization. I can go ahead and, let's say, apply my own category to this. I want to see the AI decided to call it a fluency problem, but I can call it, let's say, a terminology problem, and I can type in my own comments. But it is suggesting, it is inferring the kind of changes that are being made as I'm making them, and it's trying to describe why these changes are happening. So here's another example. Let's change here nossa plataforma to nosso sistema. And again, now it's categorizing this as grammar, and it's saying the review translation is missing the word uso, which was in the glossary at the end of the sentence, which makes it grammatically incorrect. So it's flagging an actual error as far as my implementation, instead of actually describing what I changed. Again, an example of where the AI may not necessarily just do what it's told. Again, I don't consider this a hallucination, but it is pointing out something that may be missing in my translation, when in fact it could be only identifying what I was changing. But that's basically the quality professor is trying to understand the nature of the changes and trying to describe them to me as a user. Okay,
we have 1 more minute and 2 questions, so let's take them very quickly. Okay. First of all, can it integrate with voice-to-text software?
Yes, you can integrate it through our API.
Okay, excellent. And in terms of type files, file types, do you consider it has a big range of acceptable file types? Does
I think
BWX handle all the file types as a source, or?
yeah, definitely not all the file types, because I don't even know what that means, but I think it's over 30 different file extensions.
I think that's
and
enough.
again, we can share that, but it's basically industry standards, in design,
Mhm.
Word, Microsoft Office, XMLs, structured files, YAMLs, all that stuff. That's it.
Okay, well, excellent. Do you mind typing your email in the chat so that people want to get in touch with you and ask more questions? They can do that.
Absolutely.
I think it
Yeah,
would be
I'll
great.
type in my newsletter.
Yes, I think Rodrigo already did that.
Okay, perfect. And my email, in case anybody wants to reach out, here.
Yes, excellent. So thank you so
Actually,
much, Gabriel.
let me
It
just
was
type it
very
here.
interesting.
Thank you. Okay,
Very interesting. And let's see if there are other questions, I'll send them to you and you can reply directly to people. So thank you so much for presenting this. And thank you to all our participants for being so interactive. We would appreciate it if you could take 10 seconds of your time to fill in the post-webinar survey, let Gabriel know how much you liked his presentation. And of course, give us feedback on future topics for our webinars. I'll include in my email the link to the recording, but also the next 3 webinars that we have planned for June. So for now, thank you so much. Have a good day or a good evening, depending on where you are. And I hope to see you all very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, everybody. Pleasure being here.
Thank you, Gabriel. Bye.
Bye-bye.